Hello, my name is Adeshewa Adesiji. I am the Deed Metro Area Workforce Strategy Consultant. I am filling in for Jessica Miller, who is the Director of Workforce Strategy. On behalf of Jessica and the Workforce Strategy Consultant team, we would like to welcome you to December's Workforce Wednesday webinar. If you are new, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. We are glad to see you again. Before we start, as usual, we would like to have everyone put in their name and where they're from in the chat. We love to know where people are from when they attend our webinars. So if you can do that, that would be greatly appreciated. So before we begin and get into the topic for today's webinar, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what we do as workforce strategy consultants. So as you can see in the slide, there are four things that we focus on as workforce strategy consultants. We actually focus on a plethora of things, but these are four of them. As workforce strategy consultants, our goal is to assist employers in increasing the number of applicants and new hires. The main focus, or one of the main focus for us, is to help employers strengthen their workforce. We also offer employer tools and assist them in reviewing and enhancing their current training programs. We also enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, as it's called, within their workplace. Last but not least, we develop programs that help employers be recognized as an employer of choice in their industry, or employer champions, as we like to say. So what do we do? Our mission as workforce strategy consultants is to develop innovative workforce solutions by aligning resources, facilitating collaboration, and leveraging expertise in targeted industry sectors to drive economic equity and growth. So as you can see, there are 5 focuses that we have when working with our employers. We focus on recruiting and brand awareness, employee retention and career opportunities, onboarding, training, and upskilling, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Last but not least, engaging community partners and stakeholders. And so the process that we have for working with employers include researching, collecting data, reviewing best practices by other employers in and outside of our clients' industries, identify priority areas of interest for the employer. What are the short-term and long-term goals of the employer? Develop strategies and convene partners based on those short-term and long-term goals, implement strategies and move them from strategies into actions, and then review progress, evaluate priorities, adjust as necessary, and maintain communication in a relationship with our employer. So as you will see on this slide that we have for our 2025 lineup, we are excited about going into the new year. One of the goals of the Workforce Strategy Consultant team is to always expand our topics, having the next year be more exciting than the previous year. And as you can see, there are some topics that we adjusted and that we'll be returning to because they are important, but then there are some topics that are new and that we decided to add just due to the changing or the current climate, workforce climate. So for example, for January 8th, the topic is on Deed's business development team, the key to business expansion and growth. But then we also have, if you look at July 9th's topic, introduction to AI for employers, what it is, how it works, and why it matters. So there is a wide range of topics that we'll be discussing for 2025. We are excited about it. We hope you're excited about it, and we hope that you will attend these webinars to learn more and to hear from subject matter experts on these topics. So our team thought about, okay, what should we have as our last webinar for the year? And so after just a really in-depth conversation, we thought, because there were so many good topics, so many good webinars, let's just do a year in review a best of the best. And so this is what this webinar will be focused on, having us talk about best practices, key takeaways from the webinars that we facilitated in 2024. So each of our consultants will talk about the webinars that they facilitated, what were some of their key takeaways and some of the questions that were addressed during their webinars. But right now, let's look at the agenda. So for the agenda, we will talk a little bit about the business development team, talk a little bit about the workforce strategy consultation process, Workforce One Day's year in review, best strategies and regional success. We will provide resources throughout the webinar, and then we will end with Unplugged. So for those who are new, and this is your first time attending this our webinar, the Unplugged is 30 minutes after our webinar, where the audience has the opportunity to unmute themselves and ask questions to the panelists about the topic that was addressed during the webinar. For this webinar, it'll be just the Workforce Strategy Consultants, so you'll be able to ask us questions about the webinars that we facilitated and any other questions that pertain to any of the webinars for 2024. So let's talk a little bit about the Workforce Strategy Consultant team priorities. So as you can see, there are 6 main priorities that we have as Workforce Strategy Consultants. One, to provide support to the employer that's looking to grow their workforce. Consultative reports, so providing documentation in the form of consultation reports, which will have information important to the employer, including strategies for them obtaining their goals, where it's short-term goals or long-term goals. Support for the Governor's Workforce Development Board and vice versa. How do we support that group? Statewide support through maybe statewide initiatives that we have joined or that we have created ourselves, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. Regional support, how we can support our partners and our employers in our areas, and then continuous improvement. How can we continue to increase the service and the level of service and the quality of service for our employers and for our partners? So if we take a deeper dive on employer supports, these are some of the things that we mean by employer supports. So supporting business development uh, employers that they worked with that received MIF and JCF funding. So MIF stands for Minnesota Investment Fund. JCF stands for Job Creation Fund. And so those are funds that employers can receive for establishing locations if they're new to the Minnesota market or expanding their current locations here in Minnesota. As an extra added bonus, they get to work with the Workforce Strategy Consultant in their area, where we assist them with strategy development and connecting to those partners in the area that can help support their efforts. Once again, consultations, a service that we like to provide is to put together consultation reports, which details the conversations, short-term, long-term goals, data about from our LMI office for their areas, and then strategies, a list of potential strategies for the employer to review and hopefully implement when recruiting and retaining workforce talent. Also, community engagement, how to get them engaged with the communities, and then sector partnerships. What are some existing sector partnerships that they can be a part of, or what are some sector partnerships that we can help them grow from the ground up and invite other partners in their area to be a part of this partnership. So when doing a deeper dive with workforce strategy consultations, uh, some of the targeted audiences for these consultations, once again, includes employers that received those grants and funding, the Minnesota Investment Fund or Job Creation Fund through DEED. Also, Any employer that has received funding through our Minnesota job, um, I'm sorry, Minnesota MJSP, Minnesota Job Skills Partnership. Um, Also looking at prioritized sector engaged employers and then referred prioritized sector employers. So if you fall under this category, we would like to put together consultation reports outlining or detailing specific strategies for you to implement. Now, if you do not fall under one of these categories, don't worry, you can still work with the workforce strategy consultant, and we can look at doing a shortened version or an alternative to a consultation report and detailing or outlining some strategies for you to possibly implement. So looking at Governor's Workforce Development Board alignment and support, some of the alignment and support and partnerships we have with the GWDB includes the CHIPS, that's the Semiconductor Coalition, the Manufacturing Subcommittee and Tech Subcommittee through the Drive for Five initiative. So looking at statewide support, as I mentioned before, um, one of the things that we do as Workforce Strategy Consultants, we look at as a whole, what are some gaps? What are some potentials? What are some things that we can do outside of consultation reports and working with employers to actually assist employers? And so some of the things that we come up with is, for example, in the metro area, the Diversity in Manufacturing Initiative. In our Northwest region, the Minnesota Indigenous Workforce Initiative. We have Fair Chance Talent Pipeline. We have an Immigrant, Refugee, and New American Talent Pipeline. Of course, the Workforce Wednesday, so looking at employer best practices, and then our energy transition. How can we assist and support this statewide initiative as well? So going to our regional support, um, another thing that we do as Workforce Strategy Consultants, we engage with our local partners and supports, and some of the ways that we do that is that we hold deed partner meetings. We hold meetings with our MOB, which stands for Minnesota Association of Workforce Boards. So those are the local workforce development boards. So having meetings with those directors to share information about employers in their areas that we are currently working with. We have regional education quarterly meetings where we meet with colleges, community colleges, four-year colleges to talk about employers that we're working with that are interested in developing trainings for either upskilling or reskilling workers, and really getting informing the educators about this, and hopefully making a connection between the educators and those employers. We have a regional workforce partner quarterly webinar. And then last but not least, the regional plan support. So these are some of the ways that we offer support regionally or within our regions. Finally, we're looking at continuous improvement. As I mentioned before, as Workforce Strategy Consultants, we're always trying to find ways to improve the quality of our work and the service that we provide to our clients, which are Minnesota employers. Not only them, but also our partners. And some of the things that we look at for continuous improvement, or we want to continuously improve, includes researching and identify statewide best practices, developing innovative strategies to assist employers, identifying additional tools and resources to support employers, and then identify system gaps and partner to find solutions. So those system gaps would once again be like the Diversity in Manufacturing Initiative, the Minnesota Indigenous Workforce Initiative, those statewide groups where there is a need to either reach out to a specific community or to get an industry, help prepare an industry to engage with different communities. So with that being said, I will go ahead and start with our updates. So as I mentioned, I represent the metro area. Um, Now, I focus on all five of our pies, all five pieces of our pie. But the two that stand out for me in particular are the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and recruiting and brand awareness. So in 2024, I facilitated two webinars. The first webinar was in February, and the second webinar was in September. So in February, the topic was on DEIAB, more than just an acronym. And for September, it was, what does your strategy say about you? Engaging, attracting, and retaining your workforce. So during February's webinar, some of the questions that arose or some of the topics that we addressed was, is DEIAB considered nothing more than a highly used acronym due to all talk and no action? How can employers go from just conversation to action? Do employers have a full understanding of DEIAB? And is it time for DEIAB to be considered beyond race and ethnicity, including multi-generational and other second tier categories? Some of the takeaways, DEIAB goes beyond just checking boxes. Employers must avoid stale and superficial approaches to DEIAB efforts, and then knowing the difference between performative and actual allyship. And as you can see, I included the diagram that I used in the presentation in February, which shows the difference between for performative, or I like to call, the cute iceberg above the water you can see versus actual, which is the larger portion, that hidden part of the iceberg where the real work takes place. For September, once again, the topic was, what does your strategy say about you engaging, attracting, and retaining your workforce? So the questions that were presented at that webinar, what is the message you're sending through your recruiting and retention strategies? How and where does a candidate acquire their first impression of your organization? Could your methods of recruiting be your greatest barrier? Some of the takeaways. Establishing a good reputation is key to attracting interest from employers. The difference between a successful and less successful business can come down to practices and actions. Being the company candidates want to go to and employers want to stay at. I'll say that again. Be the company candidates want to go to and employees want to stay at. Making a good first impression can determine a candidate's interest in your company. Very important. A company's recruiting and retention efforts can overlap. So, one of the things that I've learned when putting together this webinar is we usually separate recruiting and retention. And retention actually starts immediately after recruiting. So, once you recruit that candidate, now your goal is to retain that candidate, not just focus on retention once they become an actual employee, but how to maintain that candidate's interest through the candidate hiring process. Last but not least, a strong EVP, which stands for either employer value proposition or employee value proposition. It's an important factor for recruiting and retaining efforts. So an EVP is basically a combination of the middle of what you want and what the employer wants. And if you meet in the middle, that's usually the EVP. So those were the takeaways from this webinar. And so, as I mentioned, as Workforce Strategy Consultants, um, our work is very, very important to us, and we take pride in what we do. And we strive to make sure that we provide the best service and the best outcomes. We want the best outcomes for our employers, for Minnesota employers. They're not our employers, they're Minnesota employers. And so if you are interested in connecting with a workforce strategy consultant to see if one of these services would be beneficial for you, where it be helping you connect to resources, to possibly putting together maybe a condensed version or a very shortened version of a consultation report, definitely reach out to one of the consultants. At the end of this webinar, you will information about which consultant covers which region will be available. We'll also put our information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And now I will pass it along to our Northwest region consultant, Mr. James Rowland Soldier. Take it away, James.